Okay.
Hi, I'm DOV ZUCKER. I was planning to write everything down, but my good friend here, Fred, suggested to put it on video, everything. So I'm going to tell a little bit about myself, for the kids, for the grandkids to remember. I was born in Poland in 1936, in Landshut, which is part of Galicia. And it's kind of southern part of Poland, bordering Austria, and at one time it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And Landshut had about 3,000 Jews out of 30,000 people. They were there for generations. My mother, Chaya, and my father, Benjamin, were married in Landshut. My father he was born in 1901, and he was with his brothers in the fruit business. They used to go to the farms and lease an orchard and pick the apples and bring them to the town and distribute it. And that was a family business. Since the age of 11, he finished 4 years of school and was mobilized to go to work with the family. My mother was a seamstress. She was a little bit more educated, and she lost her mother at a young age, and she was brought up with 4 brothers and 3 sisters in one room by my grandfather, and he was a butcher. So my mother and father got married in 1935. In 1936, I was born on March 7th.
What were your parents' names?
I thought I said. Yeah, Chaya and Benjamin.
Do you know what your grandparents? Do you remember grandparents?
Okay, I can say, yeah. All right, just to go back a little bit, my grandfather was Chaim Yossel, the butcher, and the other one was Baruch, which is the father of my father, and their name was Zucker, and my mother's was Jason, Jassem. And the reason, by the way, my father should have been called Einhorn, but because there was, in Poland, they were drafting people to the army based on names, and they had less of a chance to be drafted if their name would be Zucker, so they took the name Zucker on my grandmother's side rather than my grandfather's side. So that's how it became Zucker. And we lived there. I was born there. I started at the age of 3. I went to the Cheder. Just go back a little bit. My father had 2 brothers and 3 sisters, and my mother had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. And my mother's brother, one in 1926, went to Israel, and he was in a kibbutz, and that's where he lived all his life. The other brother went to Germany in 1933, and he was in Berlin. And it's relevant to tell that my mother went to him. She was a seamstress, so she went for a couple of years to work in Berlin in those years, 1935, before she came back to marry my father. And she was exposed to Kristallnacht and all the things that were going with Hitler coming up to power and all the Nazis. And she understood that it's not a good idea to live under the Germans. In any event, when she came back to Poland, and I was born, and the war broke out in 1939, and the rumor came out that all men, eligible men, when Germany takes over, captures them, they go to a labor camp to work in labors, in camps. So the men ran away before the German occupied Landshut, ran away to Lviv, which was at that time a part of Russia. Now it's Ukraine, but at that time it was part of Russia. So the man, my father's brothers, and he himself ran to there, and I was left with my mother, and my mother's sister was there, and the Germans took Poland in a very, very short time. It was a blitzkrieg, and we were stuck in there, and my father and his two brothers were going to come back to be with us. Who knew what's going to happen? But being that my mother was in Germany and saw what's happening with the German, she left the message to my father, you don't come back, we are going to join you. While the other two brothers came back to be with the family, and they all perished. My mother's sister and twins, and my grandfather came at that time from Israel to help her. She was single, and they perished. My grandfather was shot right in Landshut. That's what we heard. Anyway, so we decided to go and join my father. And the trip, I was only 3, but I remember flashes of events that happened during the trip. All I know, it was very dreary September, it was raining, and the only way to commute to the next town, to the border of Russia, which was about 50 miles to Przemyśl, had to go on horse and buggies. And my mother didn't have the money to pay. She went to a Polish farmer that she knew, and she said, I have a gold chain, and I'll give you this gold chain, but take us to the border there. So we took a few items that we had, and we went on this horse and buggy. And I remember the noise of the shellings. The Polacks and the Germans were shelling each other at that time, and we had to, it was a 2-day trip. In the middle of the trip, we went into a brick house to hide from the shelling. And I remember that my mother said, we have to stand under the, what do you call the door in between the two rooms, I'm sorry? The arch of the door, because that's stronger in case something happens to the roof. And we were standing there, she was holding me, and I never forget, there was a bomb fell not far from there, and a brick loosened up from the house and fell right on the head of a woman standing right next to us. I remember the blood was all over her, and this is only 3 years old, but I remember that picture. I remember. The shelling stopped and was pouring in rain, and then we continued going towards Przemyśl. When we came to Przemyśl, the Germans were already there. And now there was a whole bunch of women and children that wanted to cross to the Russian side. And the Germans stopped everybody. And my mother tells me that I had a purple beret or a blue beret, and it was pouring, and my face was all purple from the dye that came off from the beret. And the German officer looked at me and said, it took pity. Says, you send a delegation to those Russian pigs. If they'll accept you, we'll let you go. And they did. And the Russians said, okay, you can come over. And we crossed the border. And I think, and I don't remember, we must have taken a train, which was another maybe 100 miles to get to join my father in Lviv. The one story that my mother told me, that when we came to Lviv, and I had a little jacket, and she felt that something is in the collar, I don't know, she felt something in the collar. She opened up the collar, and she found the gold chain that she gave to the Polish woman, that she sewed it into the collar and gave it back to my mother, which was a very, very nice thing to do. Anyway, we came to Lviv, we were there maybe a week or two, and we boarded trains, cattle trains. And the Jews that came from, Polish Jews, were dispersed in Russian villages and places. We must have stayed on this train for a month to get where we were. And we came to a place called Kuma, which when I'm looking at the map, it's very close to the Ural Mountains near Siberia, small village. And I don't know how many families, maybe 30, 40 families with children. And we were put in abandoned military barracks, wooden barracks, and 2 barracks accommodating all the families, and they had like shelves, and each family had a different level shelf to live on. And in the middle there was a hole cut out for a toilet. You know, there were no toilets, there was no running water. The only thing I remember as a kid, when we arrived there, and it was deep, it was in the woods, there were so many mosquitoes that the men got together and they raked the leaves, put around the barracks, and they ignited the leaves to create smoke, so all the mosquitoes will run away. And we were there a few months, and my father, they asked the men what is their profession, and he figured the best thing to say that he's a cook. You know, this way he can be near whatever food there was, he'll be near the food. So there was no food, there was cabbage, some carrots, and there was no meat, potatoes. And they used to make a big soup and give it to the people. And during the day, the other people went, the winter started coming, fishing on the Volga River, which was the beginning of the Volga River there. And they used to ice fish. And all the fish were supposed to be shipped to the Russia, to the military. Anything that was produced where the cutting wood, the thing was shipped to send to the military. Somehow my father would steal a couple of fish and bring it home. And he was only with us about 6 months. Well, before, no, he was with us 6 months. Then we decided to move out of this place. We were allowed to move if we got the permit. And we moved to another town, a little bit closer, away from Siberia, closer. It was still deep in Russia, about 500-600 miles from Moscow. The name of the town was Kozmodemyansk. I looked at the map and I saw it there. And we got an apartment, I don't know, an apartment. It was really, we had to go up a few stairs, and it was like a attic. It wasn't an apartment, it was a second floor, but it was an attic. And there was a Russian family living, a woman and a daughter there. And we got the second floor, and we lived there in an attic. And this was already luxurious compared to what we had before. There was no running water, there was no electricity, there was no toilet. The toilet was an outhouse, there was no bath. And my father was maybe 3 months with us, and they took him away to Siberia to work in the coal mines. So at the age of 4 and 5, I became the man of the family, meaning that I had to go and bring water home. We had to go to the well, and with 2 buckets, fill up the bucket. I would schlep the water, and that was the water to use out of the well. We had to actually, we're a bunch of kids, we went to the river where the logs were stored when it was cold, and there was a guard there. And we'd go and divide into 2 groups. One group would kind of detract the guard, so he'd run after them. We'd go into the other side and stole a log, and then we brought it home, and we would cut it, chop it, me and my mother, with a big saw, and I would chop it up to keep warm. And we lived on potatoes all the time. There was no meat. Potatoes, carrots, cabbage. Sometimes I would go in the forest, I see some berries or things like that. So, and we were also, there was a rationing of bread. So every family would get a piece of bread, I don't know, for a week or something. And one time my mother, she was a seamstress, so there was the local people there, were kind of Asiatic people, like almost like Eskimos. So she would sew for them something, and she would get sometimes a chicken, a live chicken. And I was at the age of 5, I had to kill this chicken, but I was pretty handy with an axe. I remember that one time, and there was a log, I took the chicken by the wings and I cut its head and I let it go, and I was running away and the chicken was flying without the head. and it was a good meal after that. And we lived there all the time till I started school. Now there was no shoes. I didn't have any shoes. The way to dress, and it used to get minus 40 degrees with 2 meters of snow, which is 6 feet of snow. And most of the time it was cold. The summer was very short, maybe 3 months. But the way we used to dress, we used to put rags around the leg, on the feet, like that. And then there was straw sandals, like a Roman sandal that the local people used to use, and you put it on the foot and then tie up with the lace, you know. And that was the shoes that we, in minus 40 degrees, somehow we survived. In the summer, I was running barefoot. My sole was that thick because running, you know, no shoes. My foot became the sole became my shoe. And that was year after year. Finally, after 2 years, my father came back from Siberia. They came back to Kozmodemyansk, and he was there maybe a year. This might have been in 1944. He was with us a year, and he was mobilized to the Polish army. So he left us again and went to join the Polish army. And I have some pictures here of how, I don't know if you saw the picture with the triangle head. This is a Polish army uniform. And
Excuse me, you in Russia, and you was in the Polish army?
any Polish Jews, men, eligible men, were mobilized not to Russian army, to the Polish army. They were sent to Poland, because the Russians already started advancing in 1944, pushing the Germans back. So they reinforced with the Polish army, and my father went to, and they almost killed him there because he was a Jew. In Landshut, they recognized him. The Polish soldiers almost killed him. They broke his collarbone. He suffered from that all the time. We continued staying in Russia. I went the first grade and the second grade. I started school there. I started the school and I went 2 years. And I remember my mother would, there was a little market there, it's one of the stories. My mother would go and sell whatever bread there was, a little, to make some money. And there was a stand there, and I remember that there was a religious Orthodox Jew with a beard, and he had a few shmatas to sell. And this Russian must have been drunk, came over, started negotiating some price, and he didn't like the price. He caught them by the beard and tried to drag him over the counter. But one thing I must say, within a minute, a KBG guy came over, caught this Russian guy, put him on the ground, turned his arms and took him to jail. At that time I was thinking, look how great Stalin is, you know, look what he does, you know, protects the Jews. Because it was against the law to say dirty Jew or something. This was against the law in Russia, which is amazing that Stalin, that such a killer, murderer, took in 300,000 Polish Jews, the only one that survived, except, and took him into Russia, when all the other countries did not take Jews in. And we're among the 300,000, the 10% that survived. In any event, we stayed for 2 years, additional years till 1945, until my father came back. After the war was finished, he came back, and the Russians let us go back to Poland. So they put us on train again. The trip from where we were to get to Poland took 2 months. We actually lived on cattle. It's like cattle trains, the same thing. Again, no toilet, with one hole with a quilt around it. And the reason it took 2 months, because the train would go a few miles, then stop in another village, pick up all the Jews that were going back, then go to the next village and stay there for a few days and pick them all up. It took 2 months to get to Poland. It would stop. The only thing I remember is that on the stops there was the station. They had hot water. Russians are very into that drinking. If the chai, now the chai, at that time there was no chai which is tea. They would just drink the hot water because it was so cold. So they give you some hot water and you drink. Sometimes you had a piece of sugar maybe in between your teeth. And anyway, it took us 2 months to get to Poland. We wound up in a town called Wrocław that used to be Breslau, which was given to Poland, occupied from Germany. You know, the Russians took a part of Poland and they gave Poland part of Germany, kind of in change. So we came, and interesting, they gave, because my father was a Polish soldier at the time, we moved to a house that was occupied by Germans, a German family. So the German family was put into the basement, they were moved to the basement, and we were put into the house with another family. And I started school there, and I went from Russian to Polish. My Polish wasn't that great, but I started Polish school, and the anti-Semitism was so bad. As I remember, the teacher would say, "How come you're what was that, 8 years old, and you can't read and write in Polish?" I mean, I was in Russia. She was such an anti-Semite. But in Poland, Jews were killed after the war. Where we lived, across the street was a little kiosk that a Jew was running, selling some soda, some little candies. One night they burned the store. You know. My father was buying cherries by the wagon. I was pushing the cherries and he would sell it to the store. We survived, you know, it was made some sort of a living, but it was very dangerous in Poland. So we decided that we cannot live in Poland. And we decided to leave Poland. Now, the trip from Poland, there was a guy that took us, and we took our belongings, and the belongings were 2 suitcases. They were put on trucks, and we moved towards the border between Poland and Czechoslovakia. When we arrived into the woods, the Polish soldiers, the border guards, aligned us all in one line and said, "Put the valises in front of you." And they're standing with machine guns facing us. We thought, that's it. They're going to shoot everybody and taking whatever there is. And they were looking for gold. And my mother, she had 2 gold coins that she prepared, that she made a jar of jam and she put it inside the jam, so that, you know, to hide the gold. So it was not visible. So they were looking around, and finally they let us close the valises, and we went towards Czechoslovakia. And we were walking by foot, and everybody's with their valises. And I remember we came, and there was the open field where the border, where we crossed the Czechoslovakia. And we see these Czech soldiers with German shepherds are coming towards us. And we are going towards them. There was nowhere to go. And they came, went to all the people and took their valises to help them, which is unbelievable. Everybody fell down on the ground and started kissing the ground, because here is the Czechs were so different than the Polacks. And I remember we were lying down on the ground, on the grass. I remember it well because I was bitten by a bee right into my neck, you know, from the grass, and the father cold knife and this, just to heal this thing. And then we walked and we got to a train. They took us to, we went through Vienna. I remember passing Vienna was totally, there was no one house standing there in Vienna. Then we wound up in Germany in a camp, in a refugee camp. And we wound up in the American zone. I was skinny, like, you know, undernourished and everything. 6 years of potatoes didn't really, I make up for it now, but so we were put in tents because there was no housing, so every family got a tent. Luckily, my mother brought a quilt, a dawn quilt with her from Poland. So we were covering ourselves. It was cold, it was winter. And everybody got typhoid injection and malaria and all these things, and lice, de-liced and everything. And one thing I remember, this black American soldier was standing there and looked at me and saw that I getting an injection right in my back against malaria, and I wasn't even crying. He saw, he smiled at me, took out a bar of Hershey bar. It's the first time I saw chocolate since maybe the age of 3 in Poland. I haven't seen chocolate. And I had that. As a matter of fact, I just remembered something going back. When the war was over in Russia, they had one bulb, light bulb, in the school. And the bulb turned on, there was electricity, the light came on, and they gave every kid a piece of white bread and jam. I've never seen white bread. You know, the bread in Russia was so soggy with water, you squeeze it, water would come out. It was rye bread, not rye, black bread, like pumpernickel, whatever. So the first time I saw white bread. Anyway, when we came to Germany, they were giving us food, so it was already paradise. And we lived there close to a year in those tents. And from there, we had an option. In Germany, we had an option either to go to the United States. Well, we had an option at the time. This was 1946, 47. We had an option because my mother had a sister in New York, so we could have gone to the United States. But she also had a brother, one of the brothers, that survived in Belgium. By the way, her brothers, 4 brothers out of the 5 survived. One was killed, he was killed in the First World War. And the sister was killed too, with the twins. Who knows what they did with the twins. Anyway, my mother's brother came to Germany and falsified papers to smuggle us in into Belgium. And he said, don't talk, don't say anything. We went on the train, we took the valises, we had some, I remember some yellow papers or something. And we wound up in Belgium. So in 1947, we wound up in Belgium.
What was the reason for this falsification of the papers?
Because we're not allowed to. We were not immigrants. They were not allowed. We didn't have a visa or anything to go to Belgium.
What did the papers say you were? They were
I have not, I'm sorry?
Did they say these papers said you were Belgian citizens?
Not Belgian, it's legal immigrants or something like that, through my uncle or something. So we wound up there, and there was now a few years that I didn't even go to school, you know, from Russia to Poland to Belgium. Now I had to switch to French. And I started 3rd grade, even though I was supposed to be a little bit older, and another one. But actually I started second grade, and I learned the language quite fast. As a matter of fact, I finished first in class. The second year, my father bought me a bicycle already, just because of that. But we were about 2.5 years in Belgium. We also lived kind of an attic. It was already luxury because my uncle had an apartment, and above that was a kind of apartment attic. And to me, Brussels, you know, I was like a kid coming out of the jungle, like Tarzan, seeing electricity and neon lights and cars. I haven't seen a car. In Russia, there was no cars till we came to Belgium. There was no cars, no trucks, no train. Train, we had to go by horse and sled a few days to get to the train, you know. So I was like mesmerized by this big city. I had milk. It was given to me the first time. A lot of things were a first. But Belgium, you know, it was an advanced country as compared to where we were. And then in 1949, 48, the State of Israel was created. And my mother, she had 2 brothers in Israel, and said, okay, enough, we need to go home. We have to be home. And she did not want to come to the United States. And there is a story, she was at that time almost 42. And I was almost 13. I said, Ma, I don't want to be by myself. I want a sister. I don't want to be by I want a sibling. I want a sister. Specifically, I wanted a sister. This was still where we were in Belgium. And believe it or not, my mother became pregnant at the age of 42. And we left Belgium, went on this immigrants boat, this refugee boat. My father and I stayed on the outside, and my mother had a cabin because she was pregnant. And I was March 7, 1949, I was 13. I was supposed to have my bar mitzvah. Of course, on the boat, on the ship, who even thought of a bar mitzvah? So we went to Israel, and I will not go too much what happened in it, but that's only the beginning. When we arrived to Israel, and being what I went through, with all this anti-Semitism and being a rejected Jew in each country, and here I come to this country what looked to me like utopia, and I see these policemen, are they Jewish? Or these porters, these big guys. I said, this cannot be Jews, all that. But they were. I said, are the birds Jewish? Are the fish Jewish? You know, I was kind of, it was, to me, it was very, very emotional. And we came to Israel, and we went to to live in tents, an immigrant camp, and we lived there for a couple of months. And my mother's brother had a little house, like an abandoned house almost. So he took us out to Tel Aviv and brought us to Tel Aviv. And I was in paradise. No matter, regardless how we lived and what condition we were, I was in paradise because I was free. I could start learning Hebrew. I could speak Jewish, Yiddish. And it was among my own people. The friends were all Jewish, you know, so it's difficult to explain to somebody that didn't go through the same things that I went through, the feeling that I had. And we were very poor. We lived in one room. My sister was born. We actually lived in a hallway. That was the room, and we shared the kitchen with another family in a bathroom. But we were selling corn. My father was boiling corn in a pot, and we were putting corn, and people would come and buy a corn to eat corn. That was, and then he started selling some fruits and vegetables. And then after that, we moved to an apartment in center of Tel Aviv. This was already an upgrade, and we rented an apartment. It was one room, a real room, where all 4 of us lived in one room. There was a little terrace. that I slept on the terrace in a little kitchen and a bathroom and a toilet. And then we had to ignite the primus, which is a kerosene lamp, to heat up the boiler, to get hot water. But I went there. I went through grade school, finished grade school. I went to high school. I went to military. And I was very much integrated into the Israeli life. But in 1959, my parents decided that it's, there was the 1956 war that I wasn't fighting, but I was there, and we were repairing tanks and things like that. And she said, and the Fadain was all the time. So she said, instead of going to the Technion in Israel, go to United States. There at least you'll have quiet, peace and quiet. You don't have to go to the reserves. So in 1959, I was accepted to NYU before I came. And my aunt gave me the visa, and I lived with her for a while. And that's another segment of my life coming to the United States. I became an engineer, and there's another story to that.
How did you survive on the train? You said for 2 months.
Yeah, well, as I said, they were stopping in these villages and bringing some bread, some potatoes. There was a stove in the middle of the train, a hot stove, and they would to keep the place warm, and they would cook things a little bit, potatoes, a little bit cabbage, or whatever there was available. That's how they survived.
So you paid with the money that you brought with you, the jewelry?
I know my father had some rubles, because he was handling a little bit when he came back into this market. He was selling, buying a little bit. He was working here and there, so he had some rubles. My father was a little bit of a wheeler dealer. He was a survivor, no matter where he was. When he went and came to the Polish army, he got some money there, a little bit, And my mother was a seamstress, so she got. There was enough to buy some. I think, because I don't know all the details, I think there was provision, I don't know which agency that would help to feed the people that were maybe the UNRWA or somebody else helped supply some food.
When you got to Russia, they were in a camp first.
In Russia? No, we were not in camp in Russia. We were in barracks. There was not a camp, an abandoned barracks, and we lived there. That's the only place we lived. And in Russia, you cannot move from town to town unless you get a permit from the mayor or whoever, or the KBG, the head of the KBG, that you want to move from this to this. As a matter of fact, from that town to the next town, we went by rowboat. And I remember that because the rowboat was leaking, and luckily it was going with the flow of the river, so we didn't have to. And we were sitting with cups there all the time and pouring the water out of this thing. But that's how we wanted in Kozmodemyansk, Yeah.
Were you able to pay for the barracks, or was it?
No, we didn't have. No, it was not. We didn't have to pay for the barracks.
Who was paying for the?
The barracks was provided by the Russians.
So the Russians took in all these people.
Yeah.
And helped them.
Yeah. Actually, I remember they gave us a few sacks of potatoes, and they actually cultivated a piece of land, and my mother, me, and my father, and before he left, we planted the potatoes. Then he left, so we had to, my mother and I pulled once it grew, the potato out of the ground, belonged to every family, got a little lot. We stored it, and that was the food.
How long were you, when you went back to Poland, how long were you in Poland before you left to go to Belgium?
No, in Poland, first we went from Poland to Germany. Right. In Poland we were no more than 6 months. Mm-hmm. And then we went in Germany, we were a little bit more than 6 months. Then we went to Belgium in 1947. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, during these 2 months, as a matter of fact, in one of the forward trains we found out that there was distant cousins, 3 girls and her parents. They're living in the, and of course, for me this was like heaven. The rest of the trip, once we discovered, I was staying there in that cabin to play with the girls, you know, they were cousins, and later on they wound up in Israel, and I went to visit them. So they grew up, but that was part of the family that we discovered. There was one, not family, but there was, when we were in Russia and living in the second town in Kozmedivyansk, on that attic, we took in a woman and a girl to live with us because the father was also taken to the Polish army, and she was by herself. She didn't know what to do. So we didn't have anything, but we helped her to live. So it became like family. As a matter of fact, when we came to Poland, that house that we were given, because my father was a Polish soldier and the other man was a Polish soldier, we lived together in that first floor. Then the latest what we heard that then they went to Germany also, and from Germany they went to, from the camp they went to Australia, and we went to Belgium. So and my mother and them were corresponding, and I have, as a matter of fact, some pictures of the girl and the mother who were corresponding for many years in Australia. The daughter is probably still there if she's alive. So that's the family. So there in Russia we didn't have any family. I remember my aunt from the United States came to help with the birth, and to give the sister a birth. And I remember my cousin, an American cousin that she went with the aunt, came with the aunt. We were walking in the backyard of the hospital, and we were walking. And I heard somebody screaming and yelling. And I said, look at this, who is this? She said, this is your mother giving birth, you know. But in any event, my sister was born, beautiful baby, and we became very, very close because there was 13 years difference. I almost brought her up. And when I was 23, I left Israel, and she was only 10. She was very, very upset that I left, because all these years while I was in Israel, I was helping in the store. My father had a little fruit and vegetable. He used to deliver the potatoes and the oranges in boxes. Somebody had to go up to the 4th floor. There was no elevators at that time, so I used to do all the deliveries. When I came back from school, I used to help. And when I left, she at the age of 10 had to start doing that. So till today, she didn't forgive me that thing. But one thing to that story about the 13. When I reached the age of 14, and by the way, when I came to Israel, I was put in the 6th grade. So I never went to the 4th, the 5th. They put me in the 6th grade because of my age. I should have actually been in the 8th grade because of my age. But Viga didn't know Hebrew, and it's a new language. They put me in the 6th grade. So at the age of 14, my uncle said, listen, we have to make a bar mitzvah for him. So they decided he helped, and I was bar mitzvah at the age of 14. I didn't tell the friends that I'm 14. I was embarrassed. So I told them that I'm 13. So everybody knew I had bar mitzvah. The friends were invited. So until maybe 10 years ago, everybody thought that I was 13, and I was actually 74. Now I'm 74. They think that I'm 7. Finally, I told my friend, my best friend in Israel, I'm actually a year older. I'm going to be 75. He said, well, I was at your bar mitzvah. I said, well, my bar mitzvah was on the boat. We couldn't have bar mitzvah. So that was a secret that I kept through all the years until maybe 10 years ago.
And your wife, when you met your wife, did you tell her what your real age was?
No, the first wife, yes. But my girlfriend, as a matter of fact, we are going to Israel for my 75th birthday. And my ex-girlfriend, Sally, agreed to that. insisted that we come for Shabbat, for Friday night dinner. I haven't seen her for all these years. And Sally kind of reluctantly said, okay, we'll go. My sister and her are kind of friendly because she produces facial materials, and my sister does sometimes facials. She learned it from her mother-in-law, so she buys from her the material. So they're kind of friendly. So when she heard that I'm coming, so she invited us. So I'm looking forward to that. I remember in Russia, when my father came back, he bought me, instead of wearing these sandals, he bought me something that the Russians were wearing. They were boots made out of wool, woolen boots. It's called valonki. And these woolen boots actually kept the feet quite warm. Now, in the winter, the only way to go to school, you had to go by skis. And they bought me some small little skis. I remember, and I became quite a good skier because we lived on the banks of the Volga River, and it was quite steep. And I used to go down, and no sticks. I didn't have sticks. And I used to call my parents to come and see how I'm riding the skis. But one time I remember it was minus 40 degrees. It was so cold, and I decided I'm going to school anyway. I came to school and going by skis. There was nobody in school. The school was closed. Even the Russians didn't come. I thought I'm going to freeze. Luckily, there was a warm brick stove. You know, that's how they used to keep the bricks were still warm. And I put my face against and that's how I warmed up. But the winters were terrible. And when we left Russia, we had to go, as I said before, there were no cars or trucks or anything. It was a big sled with horses. It was a big sled, and they put everything there, and you couldn't sit on the sled because it was too cold to sit. So we walked behind. What I remember is there was a few religious Jews with beards walking with us. And I remember the icicles hanging from their beards. It was so cold. The icicles were frozen to their beards. So that was one of the things that I remember. And that took a couple of days to leave, to come to a normal town, to the train. And there too, on the way, we had to stop in a house and to warm up, also with the brick ovens. And finally we got to the trains, and then we put on these trains that I just said. I think the name of the town was Yoshkarola. I looked at it recently on the map just to see. I found all these towns. Now, after the war, all the Polish Jews that came to Russia, as opposed to the Russian Jews, were allowed to leave, go back to Poland. He let them go. The Russian Jews were not allowed to leave. So everybody left. I don't think anybody, I mean, maybe here and there, maybe somebody was an intermarriage or something, but maybe some Polish Jew married a Russian Jew or something. They had to stay. But all the rest went back. As a matter of fact, one story I did not say. My grandfather from my father's side and 3 of his sisters wound up in Siberia. They wound up there, and my grandfather actually died of starvation in Siberia. The 3 sisters that survived after the war were allowed to go back with a few children back to Poland. And I don't know what happened, because they had to go by boat on the Volga River, and one fell off the boat and drowned. And I don't know if somebody pushed her. Nobody knows the exact story, what happened. But she actually, can you imagine, surviving the war, going back, fell into the river and drowned. So this was the youngest sister, my father's sister. The other two, with the children, wound up also in Germany, in the camps, and then wound up in Israel. And we kept in touch all the years when we were living in Israel. My two aunts and the cousins that survived, you know. That's the only family that went through similar what we went through and survived.
Did you have any family that did not leave to go to Russia, stayed in Poland, and was put in a camp?
Yeah,
And survived?
sure. My two brothers, my two uncles, my father's two brothers that came back to be with their family, as opposed to my mother that didn't say my father stay in Russia. They perished. With the children, with the wives, with everybody. And once my mother's sister that had twins, she was a little bit hard of hearing. And her husband left her just in 1939. So my grandfather happened to be at that time on her father in Israel with his sons. So he decided to come back to Israel to help her in 1939 when the Germans just occupied. And the latest we heard that he was shot in Landshut, right in the street. He was killed. And who knows what happened with twins. You know what they were doing with twins, the Germans. They took the twins to concentration. So obviously they did not survive. Not the sister and not the twins, and that they perished. So it was just my mother's intuition. Because I was 3. They didn't have a use for 3-year-old kids or 1-year-old. They right away, there was 1 million kids that got vanished in the concentration camps. If we stayed in Poland, I would have never made it. And I don't know if my parents would have, but you know, it was like life and death. Because she had this intuition and experience to live under the Germans, you know. So that's why we survived. Now, the Russians did not kill Jews, did not kill Polish Jews. They might have been anti-Semitic, they hated the Jews, but they did not kill Jews, you know. And that's why we were able to survive. I have one picture that was taken at the end of the war of my father as a Polish soldier, me and my mother. What's interesting about it is that at the end of the war, we were allowed to receive a package, or packages. Somehow it got to Russia, and I don't know now, at the end of the war, just before we left, from Israel, my uncle sent me a pyjama, a winter pyjama. So when we had to take pictures, or when we took the pictures, family pictures, I used this pyjama as my suit. This was my suit. So I have this picture here. I was so proud to wear this thing. You know, this picture is already in Belgium. In Belgium, in school, you wear uniforms. So this is, you know, this is a picture of me in Belgium. In any event, here we are in Valencia Palms here, a beautiful place. And when I reminisce of what I lived through, I did not suffer, in spite of what maybe somebody else listens to the story may think, wow, this kid has a tough life, had probably suffered a lot. I did not feel that I suffered, you know, because when you are a kid, you try to make the best of, that's all you know. So you try to have fun from whatever you have, whether you play in the woods. We had to make our own toys. Till today, I know how to make a few toys. I know how to make a whistle out of a tree, or we had to make little boats. We did it all, carved ourselves, and we did not feel that we are suffering. And relatively to other people that lived here, other kids, we had a tough life, but we did not feel that we are suffering. So, you know, okay, we arrived to Israel in 1949. As I said before, this was, to me, was paradise. Even though the condition of that time are very, very difficult, but after going through what I did and being among our own people, there was nothing better in the world. This was the place, utopia. And the first couple of months we lived in tents in an immigration absorption center. And we were kind of used to live in tents. And my mother had an uncle in Israel that came in the early, two uncles actually. One came in the late 20s and one early 30s that lived in Israel, one on a kibbutz and one in Tel Aviv. And the uncle in Tel Aviv had a house that was boarded up. It wasn't used except one room, a kitchen, and a hallway that one family used to live, a mother and two daughters. One was 16, one was a little bit older. So he moved us from the absorption center to this house. And but in the meantime, my sister was born. So here we were actually living in a hallway. The size, it's a small room. We shared the kitchen and we shared the bathroom. And my sister and the baby. So my father and I decided there's no room enough to sleep in there. We slept on the terrace outside, actually. We put poles and some quilt or something. So we slept outside, but I was happy. Anyway, the school was not far, and I started to have to learn Hebrew. Now from Russian to Polish to French to Hebrew. And missing all these years of school, based on my age, I should have really been in the 8th grade, but after the 3rd, they couldn't just put me into the 8th grade, so they put me into the 6th grade. And I came in and I sat down, and the teacher says, you sit here. Sat next to a guy, a boy, that until today is my best friend. His name was Gadi, and when we're going to Israel, we're going to see him. Whenever we go, we see him. We became very, very close friends. And we grew up together. I went there till the 8th grade. And from there, I went to a vocational high school because first my mother said, you've got to have a profession. Whatever happens, you've got to have a profession. So me and Gadi, we went to this Ort, and we studied electricity. At that time there was no electronics, but electricity. So it's really to become an electrician. And it was an excellent school. We studied it was a full intensive day. And it was only boys. I remember that, and it was in Jaffa. And on breaks, we used to hang out from the windows looking if any girls are passing by. When a girl passed by, it was going crazy. Everybody was whistling from the window. So it was a lot of fun, and it was a very good school. And I graduated in 1956, just as the war in Sinai started. However, I was lucky, half the class, because what they did is, being it was a vocational high school, in order to be able to go to the Technion, we had to take another 6 months of studies that we didn't, were missing out before. So half of the class stayed to continue to get a little bit more education, and half went to the army. So the one that went before us, they actually participated in the 56 campaign in the Sinai. When we arrived 6 months later, the campaign was over, and these guys already they got ranks, so they became our supervisors. Now these are the war students in the class became our supervisors in the army. And in the army, I was working on tanks and cars. We were fixing tanks and we're fixing cars. And I was stationed near Beersheba. There was
The tanks, were they old American tanks, or what were they?
there were Shermans, yeah,
World War II tanks?
World War II tanks, and we had to maintain them. So that I went to school in the army for that. And I was in Beersheba, stationed there, and I remember the sandstorms, used to get sandstorms, and we used to eat and outside, and usually the sand used to get into the food. You used to feel it in your mouth. But anyway, for 2.5 years, I was in the army, in the service, and then I was planning to go to the Technion. However, I was going out with a girl that my parents kind of did not approve that I'm involved with the girl at that time. She was Bulgarian. So she was Sephardic and I was Ashkenazic. This was like here, almost marrying a black person. You know, that's how it was in those days. Even though her father was much more educated than my father, he was an accountant, but they were Sephardic. But then they pushed me and said, look, why don't you go to the United States, study there. It's going to be quieter. You don't have to go to the reserves. And if there is a war, you can finish your studies there. So I applied. My mother had an aunt in Queens. And I was accepted to NYU before I came, and I came by boat. And in 1959, and it was Rosh Hashanah, Erev Rosh Hashanah. And my aunt waited for me. Then I went to register in NYU. It was kind of October. The semester started. And I had only $100 in my pocket when I came. I had no idea how much school cost. So when I came to register, I asked him, well, how much do I have to pay for the first semester? And they told me, well, it's $750. I almost passed out, So I said, okay, I'll come back. I have to go and get the money. And as a foreign student, I came on a foreign student visa. I was not allowed to work. But my aunt somehow arranged for me to work for somebody kind of unofficially. And I was working, and I didn't go to school. I was working for the 6 months until the next semester to accumulate the $750. And then around January, I came in and I said, here I am. They asked me, where have you been? I told them, look, it was in the middle of the semester. I cannot start in the middle of the semester. So I started school, and then I was working in a pharmacy at nights. So I was going to school in the morning and working at nights in the pharmacy, and on summers I'd work 2 or 3 jobs just to accumulate enough money to go to school. And that's how I went through 4 years of college. I paid it myself. It wasn't easy, and at the end of the 3rd year I met my ex-wife, and she was pursuing kind of, each time I was finishing my work at 10 o'clock at night, she would walk the dog. There it was in Manhattan. Every night. And I guess I was kind of by myself, and it almost resembles like a guy that goes to Vietnam, that went to Vietnam, there's GIs, and then married the local girls because you wanted family, you want companionship. So I got married. I wasn't sure that I'm doing the right thing, but we got married, and at the end of the 4th year, I got a job with IBM. I was accepted to IBM, and we moved to Kingston, New York, upstate New York. We lived there, and my son was born, Bruce, in 1965, a year later. But I had only one thing on my mind: how to go back to Israel. I had no desire at that time to stay in the United States. So after 3 years working at IBM, I started searching for opportunities to go back there and to find an American company that has a facility in Israel. And finally I found what's called American Electronic Laboratories. They actually somehow found me. They were looking for Israeli engineers that want to go back. And I went for an interview and they accepted me, and they told me I have to stay and train for a year in Pennsylvania, and then I can go to Israel. And that's what we did. So we relocated from Kingston, New York to Colmar, Pennsylvania. And my wife was totally against going back. Even though I told her before we got married, we are going to go to Israel. Said, yes, okay. But when it came time to go, she was extremely upset, and she kind of moved to New York, was staying with her parents and the kid, and I was doing everything. In the meantime, I was going to school, and I pushed to finish my graduate degree. From Pennsylvania, I was driving to NYU because I started there. I didn't want to lose credit. So in 1968, I got my graduate degree in electrical engineering. And it was the same time that we packed everything. I brought a car, I put furniture, appliances, you name it. We loaded up everything into the boat, a container. And we moved to Israel. This was in 1968. In Israel, we got, as returned citizen, the government, we gave all kinds of benefits and tried to find apartments for people that came back. And we got a very nice apartment. It was on the 8th floor with an elevator, and outside of Tel Aviv, not far, there was a country club. And we started, at the beginning when we went back, I started mixing with my old friends, but being my wife was American, she didn't mingle too well with them. So we found, at that time, in 1968, was a tremendous immigration of Anglo-Saxon Jews from England, South Africa, Australia, United States. They were all coming because it was after the Six-Day War. It was a big immigration into Israel. And a lot of them settled in that area where we were. So we integrated very well, made a lot of friends. We joined the country club. Life became very, very good. And the first 2 years, my wife still had problems adjusting to Israel. And I told her, why don't you go back to the United States for the summer, for 3 months with the kid, and see how you like it. See if it's that bad here, we'll go back. If not, you come back. So she was for 3 months with her parents, and she couldn't wait to go back to Israel. So she went back, and then my daughter was born in Israel, Lisa, in 1970. 70, right. And she was born there, and we stayed for another 2 years. And we had a very good life. The only problem was the salaries were so low in Israel for engineers that I was in deficit. Every month I was deficit $100, $150. And I was saying to myself, my car is getting older. We have a 2-bedroom apartment. I want to get to a 3-bedroom. How will I ever be able to get any place? So I told my wife, why don't we rent the apartment, go back to Israel, I'll work there, to the United States, I'll work for a few years, I'll accumulate $50,000 or something, I'll put it in the bank, and then it will bring the interest, and plus the salary, we'll be able to make it. This was in 1972. And we came back. And in the meantime, I got a job with General Instruments. I started working. And in 1974, I was kicked out by the company that is today my largest customer, because I had a specialty that I did in Israel that I learned. It's microelectronics. And that time, that technology in the 70s started being used in the automotive. And engineers didn't know anything about it. Automotive engineers, they never were familiar with that technology. But I was in the military electronics, and that's where I learned it. So it became a valuable commodity. So they found me, Standard Motor Products, they found me working at General Instruments, and they called me up if I want to come and set up for them a microelectronic facility to make these new electronic components, the electronic ignitions that are utilized in the car. And I figured it's a good opportunity for something new field. And I quit the job at General Instrument. They were in Long Island City. And it was in 1974. In the meantime, we bought a house in Long Island, in Comac. And I worked there at Standard Motor Products. I set up the facility. Then I was thinking, if I can do it for them, why shouldn't do it for myself? It's an infancy. The whole technology, the whole automotive electronics it's at its infancy. And even if I start from scratch, I'll be almost the same level as an established company. So I hooked up with an Israeli person that had, they used to do rotors and distributor cabs. They was already in automotive, but not electronics. So we became partners. And I sold the apartment in Israel. I took whatever money there was, and I bought all the equipment that is necessary. This was in 1977. And I started that company called Elite Electronics. And I was in the business maybe 6 months before a vice president, I don't know, came out with these products, and they were saying, who is Elite? I mean, this is new technology. Never heard of this company. So there was a guy from a vice president from Gulf and Western. They had a division, Guaranteed Parts and Service, and that was in the automotive. And they wanted to set up for themselves also a facility. And they came, and I was on the second floor, in a small place. And he introduced himself, and he liked what he saw. And he offered me right then and there to buy the company. I just started. It was barely a year. And they offered me a nice amount, not a lot, but a nice amount of money, plus 5% of the sales, of all the sales that they're going to do in the electronics. And I said, let me think about it, I just started, and I didn't say no, I didn't say yes. In the meantime, I was developing products, and the company started growing, leaps and bounds, started growing more and more. And they used to try to induce me to sell the company. And the more they induced me, the less I wanted to sell, because the company started doing very well. After 2 years, they were flying me down to Detroit on their private jet, get me drunk. After 2 years, management on their end changed, and I told them, I changed my mind. I'm not going to sell the company. They were very, very upset. Told them, look, you have new management. I don't know what the relationship is going to be. Let's leave it. So I continued on my own, and as any business, I have my ups and downs. I also opened up another business in the alarm business. I had an alarm business, car alarms and home alarms. And the people that bought from me the alarms, they gave me something to manufacture that was developed by somebody else. And I told them, this is a piece of junk. And they said, don't argue with success, just make it like that, So we were making it, and that was the second business, started growing like crazy. But being that the product was not good, eventually it caught up with them. And they used to advertise on television. It used to call the bug. I don't know, a lot of people maybe heard on ABC, CBS, and NBC. This was in the late 70s, beginning of 80s. And they went out of business when Chapter 7 got me stuck with $1 million in this alarm business. That really shocked me. I almost lost the second business too, because my automotive business, because of that. And it went to a bad cycle, but I recovered. And then in 1989, somebody offered to buy my business again. After the cycle that I went through, I said, okay, I'm ready to sell. And we negotiated, and the people that bought were people from Detroit. And they bought the business, and I did okay. And we moved the business to Detroit. So I moved, there's a story before that. Okay, before I moved to Detroit, in the meantime, in 1986, or 85, 84, I started having marital problems with my ex-wife. We just we're not suited for each other. Not that we had big fights or anything. We're just total unsuited personalities. I knew it all the time, but being we had kids, and I just didn't want to do anything. But the kids started growing up. My daughter was 14, my son was 17. I said, I cannot stay married like that and sacrifice my own well-being for the rest of my life. And in 1986, we did get divorced, and I moved out to a condo, townhouse I was renting. And my ex-wife, she bought a house in St. James in Long Island. So for 3 years, I was a happy bachelor. But I used to devote my full energy and time to work. I did go out and this and that, yeah. I had relationships, but my focus was on the business to get it back on the feet, and I did, and that's when in 1989 they just said somebody decided to buy the business, and we negotiated and wanted to move it to Detroit, and the condition was that I had to stay with the business for 3 years and move to Detroit. In the meantime, about 6 months before I sold the business, even less, I met Sally. I went to a friend of mine said, look, you're buried here in the business. Why don't you come? There is a singles party in Huntington, Jewish singles. Why don't you come? You finish the work like 9 o'clock. Why don't you come and meet me there? So I said, okay. So I left work early, 9 o'clock at night. And he gave me the directions, I remember. He gave me the directions how to get to that place. And I'm starting to drive. The reason I'm going into the details because it's Bashert. You know what Bashert is. I'm starting to drive, and I start looking for a piece of paper that I wrote the directions how to get there, and I don't have it. I lost it or some misplaced it. So I'm driving towards Huntington, and then I come to a street. I said, this sounds familiar, that street. Let me going to this street. I'm driving at that street and come to another street. I said, that sounds familiar. I drive into this, and then at the end of the street, I see a house. It was winter, with a lot of cars. I said, I bet this is the place where the party is. And I drove there, and that's where it was, you know. So I came in and introduced myself. There was a whole bunch of guys and women. And it was older, you know, it wasn't yet teenagers. It was in the 50s, I was at that time, 50. And I was talking to various people. And then I see in the other room this girl, Sally, we met, our eyes met. And she kind of gave me a smile. So, oh. So I came over to her, introduced myself, and so I'm Dov, I'm Sally. She said, can I offer you a cup of coffee? I said, sure, why not? So she went, and she came also to the same party, not because she lived there, but She was a widow at that time. And it was like a year anniversary of her husband that passed away. And we started talking, and then I walked her to the car, and I said, would you mind if I take your telephone number so we can get in touch with you? And she did give me her telephone number. And we both drove away to each one. And she tells me later, she told me that when she came home, she told her daughter, I met the guy I'm going to marry. And she said, well, you crazy, you just met him. I wasn't, at that time, was not ready for that type of serious relationship. Particularly, I knew I'm going to Detroit and everything. And another thing happened, I guess it's also meant to be that the house that I was living, the townhouse, the woman that owned it decided to sell it. It was December. I had to get out. And March, I have to go to Detroit. So Sally says, well, why don't you come and live with me for 3 months and then go to Detroit? So obviously that created more bond between us. And then she was very upset that I have to go to Detroit. But I told her, if it's meant to be, Detroit is not that far away. And I rented an apartment in Detroit, and I was working there, and I had a good time in Detroit because the people that bought my business assumed that I'm ready to retire, and I was full of energy trying to get projects going. They said, don't worry, we have 2 young guys, let them do, let's go to this club, and they were entertaining me. And I used to fly every weekend practically to New York to be with Sally, or Sally would come to Detroit, and we had fun there. At the end of the 3 years, we were debating whether we put the house for sale, Sally's house in Long Island, put it for sale and meant to move to Detroit. But it didn't sell, the house did not sell, so I said, I'm going to go back to New York. And I went back to New York, and this was in 1992. 93. I was looking for opportunities, what to do. In the meantime, I built a fence, a sprinkler system. I was doing things for Sally's house. I do all kinds of handiwork. And then in 1993, with an Israeli company, we became partners in a new venture, similar to what the company that I sold, but different products. And I was developing these products, and we were going to manufacture the stuff in Israel. So I was going back and forth to Israel now. And before that, 1990, I didn't even say, 1989, we met 1989, the end of 89, Sally and I got married, and we got married in Israel. And we still were going back and forth to Detroit. And when we got married, she quit her job and moved to Detroit to be for 1 year with us. And she rented the house, then we came back to the house. So I started, we went to...
Where in Detroit did you live?
In Southfield.
Okay.
Yeah. You familiar?
Yeah, because I'm there in the summer times.
Do you know the town's 5,000 town center? Are you familiar?
Yeah.
Of Evergreen,
yeah.
11 more. This is a big apartment house. When we were there in that house that we were living, it was very nice. And so went to Israel. We set up. I started spending an awful lot of time setting up the facility there. Actually, the microelectronic facility was already there, and I started introducing the products that we started to make. I had to teach them. We were making it in 2 locations. One is in Petach Tikva. I don't know if you're familiar with Israel at all. Petach Tikva is a suburb of Tel Aviv. And the other portion was made in Kiryat Shmona, which is right on the borderline of Lebanon. And actually, when I took Sally to Israel, I took her to the border, the Lebanese border. And I even have pictures says, careful, or border in front of you, you know, something like that. And spent a lot of time there. And then I came back, and this venture with the Israelis did not work out. I should have learned my lesson. Don't be partners with Israelis. It did not work out. We split, and they got the original market for General Motors. They had a big project for General Motors. I couldn't just support the type of investment into that. It required millions of dollars, and I had to be a partner with that. I had to invest so much money. I couldn't do that. So I decided, okay, you keep the original market, I get the aftermarket, the replacement market. And I moved it back to New York, in Hauppauge, New York, in Long Island. And 1994, actually set up a new company. And I started manufacturing the stuff here in 1994. And we lived in Sally's house. And I did it till 2001. And the company started kind of very slow, because I went for niche products, low volume. I didn't want to have all these people. I had the previous company, like 100 people with 100 headaches. So I said, I'll just subcontract a lot of the stuff and just keep a few people. And it started growing very slowly, but steadily grew and was profitable. And then we started looking for a place in Florida just to have, for the winters, you know, to escape for a couple of weeks here and there. And then we decided, we liked the place where we have a condo in Boca Raton on A1A. And we decided to buy it so we can, you know, because we liked it. It was on the beach. And Sally because we renovated the condo, and Sally would spend an awful lot of time in Florida to also supervise the renovation. I had my business there, the factory, so I couldn't come that much. And then one day she calls me up and says, you know, I love it here. Why don't you move your factory here, sell the house, we'll sell the house, and move to Florida. This was in 2001. I said, are you kidding me now? I have to start all over again. At my age, at 60, what was I, 60? Over 60. Start training new people, move everything here, sell the... Yeah, but I love it here, let's do it. Well, to make a long story short, we packed up. I came here before that. I hired 2 people that had experience, electronic assembly experience. I told them, look, I'm going to come here in May, the factory, just be available for me. And they actually waited. And we loaded up with trucks, and we brought everything here, and in Boca Raton there, and I started manufacturing here. The customer don't care as long as, you know, they don't care where it's car, could be in Alaska. And I started introducing more and more products, and the business took off. And actually, this business was even more profitable than my big business with 100 people. Here I had only 6 people, you know, because I went after these niche products which had large margins and lower volume, but if you have enough of them, you know, it was. And until today, I keep introducing new products, because in this business, as the car gets older, they start phasing out. You know, if you take a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old car, the usage is much less and less. So if you rely only on this product and you keep not develop for new product, the business is it will fade out. So I constantly try to get new products, and the company that became my biggest customer and it's called Standard Motor Products. This is the first company that I first got my job setting up for them the facility in 1974. And they basically are using me to develop products for them, because they have their own engineers. They have a lot of engineers. This is a $2 billion company. They have plenty of engineers, but by the time they set up budgets and times until they start developing the products, it costs them a fortune and takes them forever. I turn it around much faster, and I pay for the tooling and everything. So they constantly throw at me those niche products that their engineers doesn't pay for them to develop it. And that's how I build that business. And so until today, I'm very, very busy with this thing. Even though the Chinese started coming in, I have some competition. But I'm in the stage that I'm thinking maybe of retiring. In any event, we liked Florida very much. We lived in the condo from 2002 to 2000 and about 8 years, I would say, 7 years. 2008, yeah. And then we decided, we met a lot of our friends that are living, I have a friend in gated communities, in Villaggio, in here, Villa Borghese. And we used to go to their parties, and they used to invite us. And I said, you know, this is kind of fun, much more fun than living in a condo. In a condo you live, you're kind of in a little apartment. The apartment is very nice and big. You see the ocean, beautiful, on the 15th floor. But in the summer, everybody is leaving. We're left about 30% occupied. The rest is empty. And there's no social life. You know, you say hello, goodbye on the elevator. So we decided to buy a house. And we were looking around. We almost bought in Villaggio. And finally, an opportunity came in Valencia Palms. And we've bought this house, and we like it very much. As you can see, how much work we did here. I think this is our fault that we're doing this stuff. We did it in the condo, and we're losing the money. Hopefully, we'll stay here for the for the rest of our life, because we can never get out what you put in, you know. But we enjoy what we have here, and it's very pleasant. And we are here. Our kids, the only thing is our kids are not with us. Sally has a daughter and a son in New York and New Jersey. And Sally has 3 grandkids. Excuse me, yeah, 5 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. And I have 2 grandchildren, 1 for my son and 1 for my daughter. And my daughter lives in Colorado, and my son lives in New York. So we see them every 3 months, basically. Either they come here or we go there. But otherwise, we enjoy Valencia Palm an awful lot. And we made a lot of friends here. I love playing tennis. And as of March 1st, I'm going to become famous here. Everybody will ask for my autograph because I'm going to be in the breezes. So it's going to be a short summary of whatever I told here, you know. So I appreciate you, Fred, for doing all this thing. They're going to have a thing to remember after I'm gone. And they'll be able to play it once in their lifetime, maybe, to remember the grandfather. Thanks.
You know that your life was not.
It's true. It's I felt until Israel, and even in Israel, I felt like an outsider. And the truth is, it's because of all this traveling that I did and not being settled in any place. It might have created a little wall. It takes me a little bit longer to get closer to a person, or even even to a country. I mean, look at me, I'm here 50 years in the United States. I still have an accent. I don't know if it's by design or because maybe say a psychological thing that I'm not losing the Israeli accent. Even though when I speak, say, Russian, I can speak it without an accent. I can speak, even when I spoke French, I had no accent. I speak Hebrew, no accent. Polish, I speak no accent. English, I have an accent. And I don't know why. I've been schooled here, and I have the vocabulary and everything, but I don't have an accent. So I didn't feel like an outcast, but I felt a little bit like I'm an outsider. As a matter of fact, even here, say in a men's club, you go to a meeting, and the guys, sit together. I can participate, but I don't integrate very, very well, because of all my background is so much different. I don't have the same upbringing that American kids have, with the baseball and football. Yeah, I'm seeing football, but it's not life and death for me. What?
You're from New York. You have an edge over me. I'm from Philadelphia. You got the advantage.
Yeah, but
New York.
In New York, I didn't have free time in New York. Either I was working, going to school. I never had free time. But yeah, I enjoy the World Series in baseball, but I cannot sit through a baseball game just because it's because it's the Yankees. I like the Yankees, but once in a while I see part of the game. Of football, the same thing. I enjoy seeing, but my background is soccer. I used to be a good soccer player.
You watch the World Games this year?
Of course, yeah. And I was a good athlete. I was the fastest runner in my school, believe it or not, before I had this.
We can believe it.
Yeah, right. And I was a very good athlete, and I was participating. I enjoy all kinds of athletics. Ping pong and tennis and you name it, basketball, even though I'm too short, but I still played basketball, and soccer, of course, I played an awful lot and very good. So I can't wait to have some more time so I can play stickball and maybe in a golfing, I don't know. But that's a very good question that you ask. This is more like a psychological question that there is a lot of all this background maybe hardened me to a certain extent. Maybe put a little wall between me and the rest of society.
Now, as far as your grandchildren, pass on something to them now. Say something to them so they'll understand. Relate to them and let them to relate to you. When you were a young boy, when you were their age, what do you like to do, and how they can identify with you?
Well, it's a totally different circumstances and background. First of all, I come European background from a very, very poverty. My father, as I told you before, as soon as we arrived to Russia, was taken to Siberia. When we came back from Siberia, I went to the Polish army. So I was growing up, I was the man of the family from before age 5.
But I mean, what I'm talking about is you told me you did learn how to make your own toys.
Yeah, I had to be self-sufficient.
You could play. You could still find ways to play to enjoy your childhood.
Oh,
That's
definitely.
I want you to see if you can explain to your grandchildren that they don't need they don't need the latest cell phone to have fun. That they can, that you and them have the same, roots in the respect that you were still children at one time.
Of course. Like, as a matter of fact, I might have even had more fun than they do. They get tremendous amount of toys, and I can see the room is full of toys and they know what to play with. I had 1 or 2 toys that I made myself, and I played with it all the time, and I enjoyed it. And we made little boats and little whistles, and we played. I grew up on the Volga River, went skiing into the river and played in summer into the river. So it's like Huckleberry Finn. He had fun. Yes, you don't have to have all these things constantly, gifts and toys, to enjoy childhood. You just have to be happy and love. Sir, you might have only 1 or 2 toys that you love the most, so play with it. And don't expect every time you go to a store you want another toy. It's not necessary. You're going to get bored. Just be happy, enjoy life, grow up very nicely and healthy, and you'll be successful too. Here's next to me sitting my lovely wife Sally, of 21 years. Remember that? And we are going to celebrate my 75th birthday in Israel. Unfortunately, the kids are not going to be there. They can't get away.
And the grandchildren.
And the grandkids. And I just want to tell them that I love them, whether I'm here or there. I always love them.
And
okay.
We have several grandchildren.
I tell all the grandchildren. We're taking actually 1 grandchild with us to Israel.
Cassie is
Cassie.
with us. Yes,
So.
she's 21 and she's never been to Israel, and she's half Jewish, and we wanted to see what a Jewish state is like.
She actually is Jewish by the Jewish law because the mother is Jewish.
Correct.
But I would like to ignite in her the spirit of Judaism, you know, and I think there is a good place to do it. I think she might not want to come back.
We hope. We hope.
Yeah. So maybe, so for my birthday, I'll let you wish me something.
Well, since your 75th birthday is coming up very shortly, I want to wish you good health, long, long life.
Thank you.
I want to tell you that these last 21 years have been the best years of my life, thanks to you.
Thank you. Very nice.